Hey, this is Tom Kundert from Portugal.net and you're listening to the Seleção podcast.
Simões bending one for Torres. Eusebio. Oh my word! Have you ever seen anything like that?
Bem jogado por Simão, a passar por dois adversários, Simão a tentar oferecer o golo a Figo e a bola é golo! O golo de Figo!
Rui Costa já acreditou, vai tirar para o golo, atira, golo! 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 Cristiano Ronaldo, vai para Cristiano Ronaldo! Bateu, golo, 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 golo! Chuta! Gol!
And we welcome you to episode number 84 of the Seleção podcast, a proud partner of Portugal.net and of Palma Media. My name is Danny Pinto. I am your host. Thank you guys so much for tuning in once again as we're talking about some football, some soccer here on this episode. Appreciate you guys for indulging me in these last couple of episodes where we talked with Taylor Amarant and Derek DeMello and Brian Martins. The latter two of the Portuguese kids. Of course, Portuguese Problems is the new comedy sketch show that debuted this past Monday on RTP Internacional and RTP Play. So anytime I can kind of venture out a little bit and get some guys who are doing good things with our culture, especially if they're coming from a similar background like me, either first generation here or Portugal not either where we were born or not our first language or not our main language where we make our living here. But anytime I can kind of branch out a little bit, it's always appreciated when you guys are listening and when you guys are viewing. And always a good time to talk with folks who are branching out and doing their own thing as well. And I recommend watching the show. First episode debuted on Monday. They'll have 5 more episodes coming out every Monday. So check it out on RTP Internacional or the RTP Play app. But Portuguese Problems is not something that Roberto Martínez has had in his tenure so far as Portugal manager. 10 matches, 10 wins, 36 goals scored, 2 goals given up. And to talk about what's coming up now in the calendar year of 2024, which is a very, very important year for the Seleção, but especially for the reputation of maybe Roberto Martínez, is our good friend from Portugal.net, Tom Kundert. Tom, how are you doing, sir?
Yeah, I'm fine, Dan. Thanks for having me on. That was a perfect segue you had there from the Portuguese Problems, taking it back to the football. So, I'm fine. Really looking forward to, these next couple of games and especially looking forward to Euro 2024, which isn't too far away.
Yeah, before we get to the roster call-ups, obviously, Tom, we've gotten to the point that we've kind of spoken about before, ever since Roberto Martínez was hired on to follow Fernando Santos. We're never really going to really judge him for what he does in the qualification, given that the qualification should be something that we expect, not something that we hope for. But now it's the time where we are looking to see, all right, this is the year of the Euros. This is the year that he's going to have to put his money where his mouth is, so to speak. How are you looking at this year differently than when he first came on about a year ago? About a year ago this month, I think.
Yeah, well, we've talked about this, haven't we, a few times, Danny? The group was an easy group, no two ways about it. No really tough teams there, but as they say, you can only beat what's in front of you. And Portugal won 10 out of 10. It's the first time they've done that. And they did it in some style, you have to say. I think the really encouraging thing from the campaign was that Portugal got better and better pretty much as each match was played. If you remember the first 2 or 3 or 4 games, he tested that 3 at the back. Portugal didn't really click. But after that, put in a series of superb performances. But yeah, you're absolutely right. The real time where we'll judge Roberto Martínez will only be when Portugal comes up against a strong team, which of course will only be in Euro 2024, because, all throughout campaign and even in these friendlies, Portugal really haven't had, they won't be tested to the limit. So yeah, I think the preparation has gone well so far, but certainly, judgment will be reserved until coming up against, that crunch match.
Yeah, and even, we talk about the easy road that was qualification. You could argue that Portugal got a break in terms of their group as well, given that they missed out on the any one of the big six, big seven, including themselves, obviously in that number there. But nobody, no host nation of Germany, no England, no France, no Spain in their group. They get Turkey, they get the Czech Republic, and then they get the playoff C winner. So the expectation is kind of similar to the qualification here. Expectation is that Portugal, given injury, given form, should find themselves in that round of 16 rather easily. And then obviously that's where the judgment comes for Roberto Martínez.
Yeah, that's right. Although, of course, if we look back at past history, just specifically on tournament football, Portugal, interestingly, have tended to enjoy some of their most successful tournaments when they've had a tough group. They seem to kind of attract the group of death, didn't they? So often. Just thinking about Euro 2000, of course, where they had England and Germany, and I think it was Romania. That was it. It was a good side at the time, and of course they ended up having a fantastic tournament, getting to the semis. Again in Euro 2012, they had a very tough group. Germany again was the first team. The Netherlands were in there again, also a very good run, getting to the semis, and of course, especially in World Cups, Portugal quite often had easy looking groups and just made a big mess of it. So we can't kind of count our chickens before they hatch, but certainly they, if Portugal, I suppose, go into these games with the same attitude that they went into the Euro, into the qualifying games, where again, straightforward group by the looks of it, but Portugal have quite often messed up straightforward groups, but they just did a fantastic job, really. Just very professionally showing their superiority in all of these games. So that's certainly what we hope will happen in the first three games, in the group games. And, just looking at the way the pairing goes, it's a bit complicated because of the third groups. We're not quite sure who the third place teams will be in the groups in the actual tournament. But there's quite a likely scenario that if Portugal win their group, they could only face one of the really big sides in the semi-final. They'd have a good run, last 16 quarterfinals, and then potentially only get in, I think it's a Germany or France or Spain, one of those potential, opponents, one of the really big favourites would only be in the semi. So yeah, let's wait and see.
Yeah, and you mentioned, they've kind of made a mess of it in the World Cup with these easy groups. Good thing it's the Euros, Tom. Good thing it's the Euros.
Yeah. But they've actually got a fantastic record. Some people tend to look over this. Portugal at the European Championships historically have got an amazing record, really. The last Euros was actually their worst. They went out against in the last 16 stage. If you look before then, all of their participations, they've got either to the quarterfinals, the semis, or the final. They got to the semis or the final on 5 occasions. So that's a pretty proud history. So they'll be certainly hoping to build on that, make it 6.
Who knocked them out in the round of 16?
Belgium.
And who was that? And who was the manager?
Yeah, good point.
So Roberto Martínez can do a little bit in the knockout stages. That's good. Yeah. See, so we're getting there. We're getting there. Yeah. Speaking of Roberto Martínez, as you guys are watching here on YouTube, you guys can see the roster that Roberto Martínez initially called up on the 15th of March. I'll go real quickly here through the roster. And Tom, I'll ask you about your quote unquote locks that you think for Euro 2024. But On goalkeeping, I think, and I won't even ask you about this because I think these are locked in anyway, but
Yeah, sure.
Diogo Costa, José Sá, and Rui Patricio. Of course, we say locks barring any injury here, but Diogo Costa, José Sá, and Rui Patricio were the goalkeepers who were called up. On the defensive side, Antonio Silva, Danilo Pereira, Diogo Leite, Gonçalo Inácio, João Mário of Porto, João Cancelo, Diogo Dalot, Pep, Nelson Semedo, Nuno Mendes, Rafael Guerreiro, Ruben Dias, and Totti Gomes. The midfield consists of Bruno Fernandes, João Palhinha, João Neves, Mateus Nunes, Otávio, Ruben Neves, Vitinha, Bruma, and the wingers and forwards, Bernardo Silva, Cristiano Ronaldo, Francisco Trincão, Francisco Conceição, Gonçalo Ramos, João Félix, Jota Silva, and Rafael Leão. As of the pod, the last few days after the roster was called up, Rafael Guerreiro was dismissed due to injury, as was Francisco Trincão. In comes Danny Mota, and I believe there was an under 20 body that came in. I don't know if he's going to be part of the 23 that take on Sweden, but I'll get that name here in a second. But Tom, I think we are of the opinion that I think Roberto Martinez may already maybe have his at least maybe 18, 19. But what did you think of the roster, given that two injured stars, Pedro Neto and Diogo Jota, are obviously sidelined right now due to injury?
Yeah. So I agree with you, Danny. I think it's almost a closed case. I'd say this squad is pretty much all picked. He's quite consistent with his selections throughout the campaign, and we could see from that, which players he has full trust in, and to be fair, players who performed well during the qualification campaign. So if it's 23, I think they're still going to discuss the possibility of having a 26-man squad again. But if it is a 23-man squad, I think there's very, very little room for manoeuvre. I think most people could probably guess. I'd go as far as to say 22 of the players. Maybe there's just one or two slight doubts, which we can talk about. Centre backs, Pep, will he go? Won't he? He didn't play much in the campaign, of course, because of injury problems. So that's one possible area where we're not quite sure the final selection. But apart from that, I think it's going to be very difficult for any of the players who have been called up for the first time or been recalled after a long absence to even if they do something fantastic these two friendlies, I think it will be very difficult for them to find themselves in the group, just because it's only 23. You can only take 23, and who do you drop? It's going to be very difficult.
Speaking of, so 32 is when I saw that it was 32, I'm like, why is he calling 32? And I'm like, well, wait a minute. This is like probably the first like friendly that doesn't have anything kind of leading up to a tournament for Portugal in quite some time. Given that, the friendlies before the tournaments, I mean, those are more warm-up games for the tournament than it is an actual international friendly. But with that said, it's looking at the roster that is being called up and the 23-man squad that is being called up for the game against Sweden on the 21st, which is, as of this recording, tomorrow. We're recording on a Wednesday, game is on Thursday. Some notable, I guess, absences are Ronaldo. I don't believe. Pep is in there. Well, instead of who's there and who's not, I guess from more of your point of view, Tom, you're saying there's likely little doubt that anyone maybe on the fringe may play themselves in over someone who may have already had an established kind of spot with Roberto Martinez in the last year or so. I kind of want to share with you I have 18 that I've locked in. Okay. And let me see if I can share my screen with you here. And those of you watching on YouTube. And if you're just listening to the podcast regularly, I apologize for the vagueness here of my presentation here. But as I present the roster here on the old YouTube, what I hear 18 that I think are locks. Obviously, I think the goalkeepers, obviously, that's easy. Costa, Sa, and Patricio. Center back wise, I think obviously Ruben Dias, Antonio Silva, Gonçalo Inácio, and kind of like the utility man, the guy who could probably play both center back and defensive mid if needed, is Danilo Pereira. I think the only guaranteed wingbacks / fullbacks right now that I can confidently say are going to Euro 2024 would be João Cancelo and Hugo Dalot. Midfield-wise, I think the locks there are Bruno Fernandes, João Palhinha, Otávio, and Vitinha. And then the wingers and forwards are Bernardo Silva, Cristiano Ronaldo, Gonçalo Ramos, João Felix, and Rafael Leão. Those are my 18 locks. And I don't see that changing. I don't see any of those guys, barring injury, missing out on Euro 2024. What say you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think I'd add to that list probably Nuno Mendes, who seems to be, over his injury problems, touch wood, coming back for PSG and is playing quite well now. Roberto Martínez was quite interesting, was asked about him the other day. He just, spoke really highly about him, saying that he gives us things which our other fullbacks doesn't give us. Mainly, of course, his strength, such a good defender, and his ability just to get up and down the wing, really good on both sides of the game, good attacking, good defending. So I think as long as he can work himself back up to full fitness in his last, month and a half or couple of months of the season, I'd add him to that list as a lock as well. I also think João Neves, it's going to be very difficult for him not to take João Neves. He's really been incredible this season. He's been Benfica's best player, one of the best players in the league. There wasn't a certain Swede just doing amazing things. He would be in contention for player of the season, I think. It's amazing that he shows this maturity and this ability and this kind of personality and character to, almost carry that team sometimes. A team like Benfica, Portugal's biggest club, the most popular club, at such a young age, and destined for great things, of course, quite likely to be sold this summer. So I would definitely think that those two would go, João Neves and Mendes, which like we just mentioned before, just leaves very, very few opportunities for anybody to push themselves in. I thought one thing about Martinez, Danny, I don't know if you agree with this or you've noticed, I think one thing which has made him quite popular in Portugal, and as well as, being very successful in terms of his results and the performances, he's a really good communicator. He explains everything, doesn't shirk any questions, and he explains things well.
Yeah, very transparent.
Absolutely. And, it seemed a bit strange, this idea of calling up 32, 32 players. Isn't that just going to complicate matters? But he explained it really well. He just said, it's almost like having two different groups. So you mentioned some of the players which were missed out. So they have one group for the Sweden game, another group for the Slovenia game. And the reason he did this, he said, was because this stage of the season, a lot of players are just completely overloaded with games. It's a really tough time of the season. You've got to remember, many of Portugal's players are in top clubs, still in the Champions League. They're, in the running for titles and for trophies, really important part of the season. So he said he doesn't want to overload them. He wants to, and just, manage their minutes. And then on the other hand, he wants to give some players on the fringes some opportunity, an opportunity, take a look at them. And so he kind of just explained, which makes absolutely perfect sense. But like we've mentioned, I think the only one, in my opinion, the only player who hasn't been part of this group so far, who's got a slight chance of pushing himself into the squad, I would say is Francisco Conceição. Why? Why? Because I think he's a little bit different to what Portugal have, and he's, again, come on leaps and bounds this season, especially the last few months. He's been really good for Porto, probably Porto's best player the last month or so, along with Galeno, I suppose. They've really almost transformed Porto's season from such a disappointing season to looking like, they're one of the best teams in Portugal again. And also, of course, doing very well in the Champions League, quite close to knocking out Arsenal. And so I think he's a possibility, especially as, of course, the unfortunate Pedro Neto has got injured yet again. The latest I've heard is that he possibly will be back, but just literally for the last maybe 1 or 2 games of the season. So, first of all, will that happen? Hopefully, I hope for his sake. And but even if that does happen, just a couple of games at the end of the season, will that be sufficient for him to get up to speed to be in the squad? That would be a big risk, wouldn't it? I love Pedro Neto. Really disappointed for him because I think he would be one who would, have a very good chance of being in the squad. But this injury has possibly, ended his hopes. And so that's another reason why I think Francisco Conceição possibly might just squeeze in there.
Interesting. If you guys are still watching, well, of course you're still watching. Hopefully you're still watching. But I with the 18 that I named, I posted here. I think that there are 8 left in the mix for the last 5 spots. You mentioned a name that I did not put in, which was Chico Conceição. I still don't trust Pep to be fully healthy. Although what a performance against Arsenal. I mean, it's the old Michael Corleone. Just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in. I mean, it was so good, that performance against Arsenal. You forget that he's 41 years of age. But the names here, I think that are in the mix for the last 5 are Pep, Nuno Mendes, Rafael Guerreiro. Obviously, he's out right now due to a slight injury. Nelson Smith, Ruben Neves, João Neves, Pedro Neto. Hopefully, he can come back for the Euros. And then Diogo Jota. My reasoning here, Tom, and I'd like to get your thoughts on my reasoning as with these last few spots. I said that I think, and I agree with you. I think João Neves is kind of undeniable here, and I think that he may take Ruben Neves' spot with a player like Danilo kind of being a defensive midfield and being a center back. I think if Pep is healthy, Danilo could back up Palhinha, and then if Pep isn't healthy, I could see both Ruben Neves and João Neves making it, and then having Danilo still be that utility center back and defensive mid. I, like you, think that Nuno Mendes is a lock if he's healthy, with Guerreiro and Smedo in contention if he isn't, and then obviously Jota and Net are locks if they're healthy, but that's a big if, especially with Pedro Neto. But anybody you think we're missing other than the possibility of Francisco Conceição making a late run for the roster here?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I suppose the only thing is possible. Rafael Guerreiro, of course, is another player who tends to be very injury prone, and I'm not sure. I think now he's pretty fit, but if he did miss a lot of the games during qualifying. And one player who came in, who Martinez seems to like a lot also, is Semedo, Nelson Semedo. Mm-hmm. And so I suppose if, for instance, if Nuno Mendes is completely fit, and if there's any problems with Nelson Semedo, with Rafael Guerreiro, Semedo might just squeeze in as well. It's interesting what you mentioned there about Danilo, because I think Danilo, and we can also talk about this with the wing backs, opens up the possibility of perhaps squeezing in another midfielder or attacker, if that's what he wants. Because, if Portugal could just take 3 centre backs and Danilo as the kind of backup centre back. You would have thought that the first choice holding midfielder would be Palhinha, and then so Danilo could be kind of, like you said, a backup to both him and to a centre back. If Portugal take 3 centre backs, Ruben Dias, Antonio Silva, and Gonçalo Inácio, and perhaps don't take Pep, that would open up an extra position. If they took, I think they'd definitely take Danilo. If the worst came to the worst and there were 2 injuries out of those 3 I just mentioned, Danilo could slip back in there. So that's a possibility. And also, you could even say with the fullbacks, Dalot, he played a couple of games on the left. I think he's played left back as well as right back for Manchester United. And like Cancelo, of course, he can also play both sides. So imagine if Nuno Mendes is completely fit. It would be a little bit of a risk because of his past history of injuries, but a possibility also for Martinez would be just taking Mendes, Cancelo, and Diogo Dalot, and you're kind of covering both sides then,
Yep.
and then perhaps instead of taking a 4th wing back, again, Portugal have got such a rich array of midfielders and forwards. Perhaps he could take an extra one. So yeah, it's all ifs and buts anyway. But yeah, I think you've nailed pretty much the squad, and it's just going to be 1 or 2 just very slightly doubtful choices, which depends which way Martinez decides to go.
Yeah, in talking about the Sweden matchup coming up tomorrow, the names that I'm kind of interested in seeing, not so much for Euro 2024, but I mean, unless they absolutely dominate and ball out, the names that I'm looking forward to seeing in a Portugal shirt tomorrow are João Mario, Diogo Leite, João Neves. And I'm just going through the defense and then the forwards here. I'm interested in seeing what Chico Conceição does in a Portugal shirt. Looking very much forward to seeing what Jota Silva could possibly do. Also, the most recent call up of Danny Mota. The player that I failed to mention that was called up just to practice was André Gomes, who's the of the under 20 side. But I'm looking forward to see what these young players who may or may not make their way to the Euro 2024 squad, what they can do in forecasting, obviously, for Nations League in the fall, and then obviously World Cup qualifying that begins the year after. But I guess for me, Tom, like what are we looking for? What are you looking for in these two friendlies that fans should be looking for as well?
Yeah, I suppose, like we'd mentioned, there's not very much chance of any of these actually going to the squad, but I think it sends out a good message, that they are called up, that they're given a chance. It's kind of Roberto Martínez saying, not just to them, but to all fringe players, all players doing well in Portugal or abroad, or Portuguese players, you've got a chance. This isn't a closed squad. All of those players you mentioned, realistically, they're probably only going to come into the thinking for the Seleção post Euro, after the Euros, maybe the next World Cup cycle or even beyond that. And so I think it is important to call them up. Of course, Fernando Santos used to talk about this a lot, and Martinez has also mentioned it. It's important sometimes just to call up players, not only to see how they perform in the actual game, but just to see how they kind of fit into the group, how they, the kind of more social side of things, if they, the way they kind of converse and they interact with, the finest footballers Portugal have at the moment. And, the fact that you're representing your country, it's quite a responsibility. And some players kind of take to that more naturally than others, I guess. And he's looking to, kind of pick up those kind of signs, I think, and seeing who he thinks that, this guy could really help us, if not in the Euros, then in the future.
The younger players that we mentioned looking to make a splash here in these two games. We mentioned João Neves. We both think he maybe not a lock, but a pretty good chance he's making the Euro 2020 the 2024 squad. You mentioned a dark horse in Chico Conceição. Anybody who you're looking forward to seeing in these next two matches?
Well, Conceição was one definitely. Just to see how he does react. Of course, father and son. That will be. I was reading the other day. I think the fifth father and son combination. Who if he plays for Portugal, both the father and son have played for the full national side. So that's quite a nice little side issue as well.
Tom, I'm gonna put you on the spot. Who are the other four?
Well, I should remember it because I just read it the other day. There's one who. I think the ones with the most caps are Antonio Veloso and who's his son?
Miguel.
You in the spot.
Miguel,
Antonio Veloso and Miguel Veloso, of course. Interesting. One Benfica legend, the other Sporting, of course, came through the Sporting side. So that was the ones with the most caps. Sergio Conceição and Francisco Conceição. Who were the other ones?
I ask because I don't know. So I'm putting you on the spot, Tom. If you don't know, don't worry about it. I'm trying to be a shock host here, putting my guests on the spot.
Yeah, in and out of my brain, just like that.
Wouldn't it be something at some point in Sheik's career? He puts three behind a Germany goal at some point too. Did you come to the realization of who they are now?
I remembered another one, which was Paciencias. The Paciencias.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Domingos Paciencia played. He played quite a few times. Portugal, scored quite a few goals, and of course Gonçalo, his son, who really been so unlucky with injuries. He could have been a good player, a big player. He could have had a different career, and he could have been an important player for the Seleção. But unfortunately, his career has been really blighted by injuries. So that was the other one. There was another. I must admit, there was one which goes way back, I think, to the 60s or 70s, and the guy, I can't remember either the father or the son, only played once for Portugal. So you'll excuse me for missing that one.
Still happened, but maybe just not as frequent.
Yeah, and there was one more which I can't remember. Maybe leave the listeners to try and work out the other one. And as you're speaking, Danny, I'll look it up, and we'll say at the end of the show.
Yeah, absolutely. We're talking with Tom Kundert here of Portugal.net. He's kind enough to join us here on episode number 84 of the Seleção podcast, as we are looking forward to the two friendlies for Portugal Thursday, the 21st against Sweden in Portugal, and then on the road away on March the 26th at Slovenia. We're trying to we forecasted, I think, the as of right now potential 2024 European tournament squad. June the 7th is an important date, obviously, for all teams that are participating in the Euros, because that is the deadline for the rosters to be turned in for the tournament. I believe they're locked in at 23. They, as you mentioned, Tom, they could be working on 26. To me, I don't see the harm in adding a few more bodies, just because you're coming right off of a season in England and in Portugal and in Spain and in Italy, and a few extra bodies I think wouldn't hurt the process. Obviously, that favors the more talented teams, because they get to bring a bit more talent, where players 24, 25, and 26 on their roster is going to be much better than maybe 10, 11, 12 on anyone else's roster. But with that said, do you think that this team, or actually, do you think that team will, or the roster, whether it be 23 or 26, do you think that team is turned in, for lack of a better term, and decided prior to the June 4th friendly against, I believe it's Finland? Because the next friendly is on June the 8th. Obviously, the roster would have to be turned in by then. Are we looking at whenever these last 3 friendlies are taking place that the squad will be set and that's what we're taking to Germany?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. He did say, Martinez did say that these March friendlies will kind of finalise his decision. That, he'll decide after the March friendlies what the squad will be. Obviously, of course, that will change if there's any injuries. But I think he must be pretty locked in. I don't know, in terms of the team itself, I think that's a different story. He had so many. He did experiment with a lot of different personnel, a lot of different systems during his campaign. So it's much more difficult to predict the team than to predict the squad, I think. Just going back a little bit. Going back a little bit about the 23-man or the 26-man squad. It's interesting, Danny, because I remember some coaches, and I think it was the Spain coach at the time, Enrique, wasn't it? Luis Enrique, before Euro, the previous Euro, the previous World Cup, maybe. He actually didn't like the enlarged squad, and he said this actually creates more problems because players who come into the squad, obviously expect to be involved. And he said it's unlikely that more than 23 players will be used. And I think, don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure that he actually although he had the option to take 26 players, he only took 23 for that reason. So you've got that point of view. But then Martinez himself, I was listening to an interview or might have been here in one of the press conferences when he's talking about selecting this squad. He said there's going to be some kind of forum or meeting of all the trainers, of all the coaches who are going to Euro 2024. And I think this is on the agenda. This is one of the topics of discussion. I think it's going to be the coaches themselves, together with UEFA, who decide if it will be 23 or 26 players. And it was
Very
interesting.
good.
And it was interesting because he himself, Martinez, said, for exactly the reasons you just mentioned there, he would much prefer a 26-man squad. And he mentioned, at the end of a long, hard season, and you don't really know about the fitness of some players. And, I suppose also it would allow you to take players who, maybe someone like Neto, who imagine he just plays the last, 2 or 3 games of the season. So he's not probably up to full speed, but, maybe with the special, I suppose, condition training, he could still be useful for Portugal. So yeah, let's see what that happens. If that happens, that will. One thing's for sure, Danny. If Portugal do choose a 26-man squad, they certainly won't have any problems filling it, will they?
No, not at all. You mentioned Nets there. I think a player that could kind of fall in that as well would be Pep. Where if you go 26, you could still give him a shirt. And see, I've always thought I think Pep's going to go to Euro 2024, whether it be wearing a jersey or being part of the coalition, for lack of a better term, because he's been such an important part, and we've mentioned this before many a times on this show. He has proven to be such a pivotal player I don't want to go over with the alliteration here, but a pivotal player and a pivotal presence for this squad for more than a decade now. And I think maybe that first initial tournament, if he is not playing, with him not being around, would be very weird. But obviously, you also, he being Roberto Martinez has only been around a year, so the ties to Pep are not as strong as they would have been to Fernand Sanch. But I'm selfishly, I'm hoping for 26 just so that I can talk myself into seeing Pep one more time. Whereas I think if it's a 23-man squad, I think he's going to have. I don't think he's a lock, and I don't think he's a lock even if he's healthy, and that pains me to say because I really hope that I'm wrong, given what I saw against Arsenal. But can that stretch out to a 2.5, 3 week, almost 4 week period where you're playing, every 4 or 5 days?
Yeah, that's right. And also one thing which is different to the quite recent past in Portugal is there are alternatives, aren't there? And very good alternatives at centre back. You know, we discussed this in past years, didn't we? Remember the time when we thought, you know, where will we be when Pep has to retire because we've got no decent centre backs.
Come on, we're still trying to figure that
out. But all of a sudden now we've got some good ones. I mean, for me, it's a really big question if Pep is fit and if if he goes. It's a really big question if he starts, because Antonio Silva just gets better and better. He's absolutely superb. He played these last few games for Benfica, in a kind of up and down season for Benfica. I think he's been, just an absolute rock at the back, even better than Otamendi. I have to say he's, made a few mistakes. And so, and also he played in the World Cup, of course, Antonio Silva. So, for me, even if Pep is fit, I think Ruben Diaz would definitely be first choice centre back. And as for choosing his partner, I think it's by no means certain that it will be Pep, even if he's fit. That said, of course, Pep is just I know legend is a word which is overused in football, but there's absolutely no doubt he is an absolute legend for Portugal. You could just look back at even, of course, the Euro 2016 final where he was man of the match in the final. Just an absolutely incredible, monstrous performance. But even more recently, the game against Morocco, you remember? Portugal were, desperate. Who was the guy who was closest to putting Portugal back? It was Pep, who had a kind of broken arm, if I remember. That it seemed to be kind of almost, bust arm, and he was going up there for a corner or set piece, so nearly snatched the equaliser for Portugal. That just shows his, it's interesting, isn't it? Because he's Brazilian born, obviously, but I don't think in the whole history of Portuguese football there can't have been anyone who shows kind of more heart and more fight and more attitude than him. So, like you said, I think even if he's not going to play every game, even if he doesn't play many games, he will probably go, and he will be a good positive presence in that group.
Last question in terms of the roster, in terms of the team, because you mentioned that there's a difference between the two. Obviously, not the roster, but I mean, not the roster and team, but the roster and lineup. Does this team, does this roster, does this manager, or with all those three, I should say, is there an ideal starting 11 for you with this squad, or is there too many interchangeable parts? Not too many, but are there enough interchangeable parts for there not to be a locked-in starting 11?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Danny. It's a really good question, and I think it's a nice position that Portugal are in now, because I think the real breath of fresh air in terms of Roberto Martínez in comparison to Fernando Santos. Fernando Santos, I think that's actually one of his good points. He was also not afraid of calling up new people, and he didn't have a completely set squad. He was very flexible like that, and he tended to call up people who were informed, people on merit. But when it came to tactics and when it came to setting up the team, it was very predictable. Let's put it that way. It was very, especially as time went on, it just seemed it didn't really matter who we're playing. It was always the same kind of, conservative, make sure first that we have a strong defense, we don't concede, and then see what happens. Whereas with Martínez, he's much more front foot and much more flexible in terms of his tactics. He's used a whole load of different systems, like we were mentioning, 3 at the back. Then he went for 2 at the back, the wing backs, also using the wing backs or the full backs, especially Cancelo as cutting inside, that kind of thing, which Guardiola does, which Cancelo was really, and Dalot, they were really effective at, during some of the games. Up front, we've had Ronaldo on his own, we've had Ronaldo alongside Gonçalo Ramos. We've had Rafael Leão, of course, playing the majority of games, 1 or 2 games where, he was on the bench. And we had maybe Jota and João Felix. And so he's tried a whole lot of different things. And so that gives Portugal, I think, that they haven't got a set team, a set 11, because, for instance, these first 3 games, group games, let's face it, Portugal would be favourites, and they're probably going to face teams who will be packing their defence, or certainly, looking to make it as difficult as possible for Portugal to make headway. So I think in that scenario, you definitely need a player like, for instance, Rafael Leão, explosive, can make something out of nothing, can really, puncture a watertight defence. Now, if Portugal are playing Germany, is Rafael Leão perhaps a bit of a liability, with he's a great player, but we all know he's got this side of his game where he doesn't contribute a whole lot to the defensive side of the game, let's put it that way. And so maybe he wouldn't be the best pick in that scenario. So yeah, that's just a very long-winded way of saying I think that Martinez, he hasn't got his set 11. Probably about 8 or 9 players who we can choose, who we can say, well, as long as they're fit, they'll probably be in the starting lineup. But he can mix it up quite nicely and change things. Also within games, if things aren't going well, he can mix things up quite nicely. And Portugal have played these different systems before, so it won't be new, it won't be off the cuff. So yeah, I think they're in a good position from that point of view.
We don't know when we are going to say goodbye to Pep. We don't know when we're going to say goodbye to Cristiano Ronaldo, but we do know that we are saying goodbye to Nike in 2025. What a way to say goodbye. Look at those jerseys. Nike has been kind of taking it on the shins a little bit in the last few years with the jerseys for Portugal, but I think they absolutely nailed these. The simplicity of the red jersey, and then the absolute beauty that is the azulejo tile pattern of the quote unquote away jersey. It's a wonderful way to say goodbye here to Nike with these 2 jerseys.
Absolutely, yeah. An absolute thing of beauty. I really like the red one. Some people have complained that it's too simple, but I just like it like that. Just all of these kind of razzmatazz modern designs. I'm a little bit, I'm not a huge fan of them, and I just think it looks absolutely wonderful. That just the red kit and the green shorts, and
well, for so long we were going red on red, and that never made sense to me. And when they went back to the green shorts with the I think it was the collared jersey for for the Euros, if I'm not mistaken. But I just think it's a sweet looking kit, both sides. I love the navy blue shorts with the azulejo jersey. I think again, it's a wonderful last effort here by Nike for these jerseys.
Yeah, I was saying, these kind of modern pattern designs in general, I'm not a big fan of them, but this azulejo one is absolutely fantastic, and because it makes sense, it's not just a pattern which is
it's not a pattern. And that's the thing, right? Yeah.
It's this is for of course most listeners will probably know, but for those who don't know, that azulejo is this kind of typical part of Portuguese architecture. You see it all the churches, all the monuments, castles, palaces, and even a lot of the houses, especially up in Porto. They've got these azulejos just cover the walls. Really nice hand painted tiles, and you get these panels, these fantastic panels as well, all over Portugal. Depicting scenes, religious scenes or part of history, or maybe something from the local, the local kind of history of wherever they're painted. And it's just they're really nice to look at, and to put that into the idea to put that onto a football shirt. It's just I think that's wonderful. And it's turned out really nicely. So I love that shirt as well.
Turkey wears red. I believe the Czech Republic wears red, so maybe we get to see those azul. It's a hard word for me to say. Azulejo jerseys at least once, maybe more, and hopefully we see either one of those jerseys about. Let's see, do the math. About 7 times this upcoming tournament. So, Tom, as always, thank you so much for taking time out of your day for being part of the episode and the podcast. And we look forward to these friendlies, and look forward to having you back on sometime very soon, Momik.
Yeah, great talking to you as usual, Danny. And yeah, this is the crunch time, isn't it? It's going to be exciting, and just the kind of attitude of the kind of I suppose you could say anticipation of this tournament. I think it's really not just because of the qualifying campaign. I think just because of the this kind of new, fresh look in Portugal. It's really looking forward to it. I think everyone in Portugal is really looking forward to it. Let's hope it meets expectations.
Absolutely. All the best, Tom. We'll talk soon.
Yeah, cheers, Danny.
And our thanks once again to Tom Kundert of Portugal.net for joining us here on episode number 84 of the Seleção podcast. Of course, we will have a recap of both the friendlies after next week's second friendly, Tuesday against Slovenia. Look for another podcast either Wednesday or Thursday of next week. A lot of anticipation. I think Tom nailed it there right at the end. A lot of anticipation of what this roster and what this team can do this summer in Germany. The players are almost locked in. We both think, me and Tom, to about the 19, 20, 21 number there, with maybe 2, 3, 4 maybe at the most, with a chance to either play themselves in or play themselves out. But it's the anticipation is growing as we are now in 2024 with the Euros. Let's see, April, May, June, just 3 months away, folks. Just 3 months away. Of course, you can always follow the podcast on Twitter, on X at SeleçãoPod. Facebook.com/SeleçãoPod. We're on Instagram at SeleçãoPod. And you can email the show, seleçãopod@gmail.com. And, of course, bookmark the website, seleçãopod.com. Also, bookmark Portugal.net on your internet browsers. We are obviously on Apple Podcasts. We're on Spotify, Amazon Podcasts, Google Podcasts, any podcasting platform. Make sure you are subscribing to us. And obviously, we're on YouTube. If you have not liked this video yet, hit the like button, subscribe to us, get all the dings, get all the whistles that YouTube has to offer, and make sure you're giving us as many of those as possible. And, our thanks to you for always supporting the pod in any way that you do. My name is Danny Pinto. I have been your host of episode number 84 of the Seleção podcast, a proud partner of Portugal.net and Palma Media. And as always, Força Portugal!